Welcome back to our continued dissection of Fate Extra's last Encore. In the first video, we covered the general schedule and topics that each individual video would hold and showcase over the anime. The primary theme that the first video specified over was the author's intention, in our case, Nasu's intention as we started to watch the last Encore anime. The author wanted the audience to feel one of two emotions. For the ones who had played Fate Extra, he wanted those viewers to be shocked when they watched the anime. For anime-only viewers, he wanted them to be so interested in the characters to eventually play the game after viewing the anime. For our second video in this series, we will solely focus on before the Mooncell Grail War. This video will encompass the preliminary stage of the anime, in which Episode 1 and a partial of Part 2 will be covered. In this part, we establish our main character Hakuno Kishinami, as we take in the differences of the environment and feel a sinister sense of deja vu from the characters and events that occur around us. That means that the cutoff point for this video will be right before Hakuno and Servant Saber leave the Moon Mile Ladder. As one final brief note, I hope that you do not think that I outwardly hate this anime. I will mention this now, better than later, that I believe that Last Encore, in theory, and for its first half, did an excellent job at pushing Nasu's intention of shock. I believe that it is only after the nursery rhyme arc that this anime falls flat. Therefore, as you probably have assumed, the first half of my videos will be generally begrudgingly positive, while the latter half will be scrutinizingly negative. It is best to get assumptions out of the way so that you know my intentions. And without further ado, I think it's time we cover Fate Extra's last Encore before the Holy Grail War. As a reminder, if you have enjoyed the first episode so far and find yourself enjoying this second one, consider subscribing and leaving a like to watch the next episode that is released soon. I would greatly appreciate it. The opening scene portrays a struggle for victory as a female character rests on a floor, dying. For her, the battle has already been lost, but as we shift our glance above the clouds, we see where the real conflict is occurring. A woman in red desperately trying her hardest against what seems to be a literal deity, and after every movement the battle slowly marches in his favor. The man is able to counter the swordswoman with what seems to be a ki blast that rips through the woman's abdomen and sends her sprawling into the abyss below. As her light slowly dwindles, an overhead white spear is sent crashing down and pierces the woman, an act reassuring the audience that not only has she lost, but been obliterated. In those final moments before she hits the ground, the red woman and the dying girl exchange one last long look as a visual act of apology. The godlike figure above, seeing that the battle has now been concluded, allows for the gears of a bright structure to turn on and shower the world in a blinding light. We end this scene on a somber note. Now, right off the bat, this scene will alienate viewers. Anime-only fans are beyond confused in who is who and what their purpose is. While I believe that mystery behind characters can prompt viewers to learn more about it, I also believe it can serve to push those away, especially when that explanation of the story is rooted in a long and tedious game that would take hours to get into. The analogy that comes to mind when viewing this scene is when the third Heaven's Feel movie was reaching its conclusion, as many viewers in the audience had no idea what the last and fast-forwarded section of the movie contained. Alienating your viewers from the start is dangerous. For those who have already played Fate Extra, this scene did invoke shock. What we are viewing is the final scene of Fate Extra, in which the main character Hakuno is fighting against Twice and his servant Saber. The reason we feel shock is because of the attachment we have built from the game. Fate Extra made us the self-insert character Hakuno, who survived for 7 weeks in Tsukimihara Academy and defeated twice. So now, when we see our representation lose in this opening scene, we feel the weight of what is actually going on. This is the bad ending. The ending in which Hakuno wasn't able to defeat the final boss and loses everything. This scene would bring a resonating feeling for those who have particular attachment to Servant Nero, who decided to choose her in their respective playthroughs over the first other two servants. While this is more of a minor detail, in the game there was a unique mechanic while fighting against Saver. Saver has two noble phantasms, and sorry for butchering these names, the first one being Chakravartin, and the second one being, and exclusively being held to last Encore, Amita Amitabha. The former is the noble phantasm that takes over the moon cell, and acts as an artillery weapon that shoots the white spear into Nero. However, that is unique only to last Encore. As Nasu stated, they didn't have the budget to put it in. Amita Amitabha, or however you say it, is the noble phantasm that acts as a timer in the final fight, in which if Hakuno cannot defeat Saver quick enough, then Saver activates a game over attack. I initially assumed both of the noble phantasms were one and the same. Nero could not beat Saver in time and allowed it to activate. While this is not integral to the viewing, I did like the parallel. This defeat scene sets the mood for our viewing for those who have played the game. We now know that the world of Fate Extra as we know it has ceased. Fate Extra's ending was that Hakuno entered the moon cell and was granted a wish because they were the only one capable of doing so. Instead, Twice wins, and the unique issue with him is that he is unable to enter the moon cell due to his composition of being an NPC. Therefore, for us, we know that the world inside the moon cell, the Seraph, will not continue forward in time, as there was no victor, hence no conclusion to our story. Our next opening scene introduces the face of our protagonist, Hakuno Kishinami. While this might be irrelevant, I remember at the time of last Encore's release, there was a vocal minority of fans who instead wanted the female version of Hakuno to be the main character, because she had better characterization in the game over the male version. From this point, the first issue is forced down our throats with the dialogue. The first opening line being, anger and hatred being our main character's nature. Inner dialogue has always been needed for a main character to properly convey their thoughts. As opposed to novel writers who can just write it in, when directing an anime, you cannot have a character mindlessly spewing out their thoughts and take up time. So instead, we are given visual cues. Hakuno's cue being that he looks dead on the outside and feels dead on the inside. The line of anger and hatred only confuses both sides of the audience, as we are left wondering how juvenile the writing is about to get. I'm not one who hates the edginess of a character, but when your principal protagonist is spewing lines like that, it only reminds me of my own writing capability of when I was in middle school. Hakuno's uniqueness is properly demonstrated by the classroom setup, as the rest of the class creates a perfect square, while he is the outlier in the back. He is the odd one out, who will continue to harness the hatred of the irrelevant individuals around him. This Hakuno clearly does not belong here. I think the first episode does an excellent role in showing us the true Tsukimihara Academy. There is a level of detail given to the structures and locations that breathe life into it, instead of what we saw in Fate Extra. Fate Extra never really detailed the outside world, as we were limited only to the school building, the elevator that takes us down to the arena, the church, and the arenas which would house the two keys needed to progress throughout the week. From that, we are surrounded by the data space, an ocean or sea, whichever way you want to think about it. In Last Encore, we get a world that is quite different. It is brighter, full of life, and passes off not just as an academy, but as a metropolitan world. The school building looks significantly different, even design-wise, as the Fate Extra school building held a depressing soundtrack as you roamed through these shadowy hallways. while Last Encore brings everything to life in an eccentric white shade. The main point here is that the anime fleshes out the feeling of being a student at this academy. My gripe is that we spend less than an actual episode seeing the exposition of this world. This is your only chance to actually breathe life into your game through an anime, and you choose to spend less than an episode showing us the lives of these students, only to throw this world into the garbage as it becomes corrupted in the second half of this first episode? It's disappointing. But oh well, I'm sure Nasu will include more designs of this city in some fan book for the price of $40. Moving on. In terms of the design and structures, and their subsequent differences, there is one particular location that is unique to Last Encore, it being the incinerator. Limbus. I assume this is a play on words for limbo, unless the Japanese equivalent is different. Limbo is the state of waiting, in a more metaphysical meaning. It is the land in the middle, just below heaven, but just above hell. There is nothing here. Just an eternal waiting, and using that lens onto our main character, we see that this Hakuno, or if he's just Hakuno in name only, is an actual person. This entire episode now has a shade of doubt whether it truly is a place that is real, because Limbo is after the resolution, but before the next conflict. In other words, after the defeat of the female Hakuno and Saber, but before the events of Last Encore. It is a nice representation of the character and what type of role they will hold. It also adds a nod at the idea of death and how it will play into our character. For purposes of Hakuno and his overall meaning of his character, I will be covering the entire representation of Limbo towards the ending of this video series, as there is a lot to talk about on that. Well, Limbus, aside from its metaphorical meaning, does have a physical purpose in Last Encore, in being the graveyard. While I think it is an interesting concept to have in Fate Extra, why is it included in the first place? We have seen before that whenever anyone dies on the moon cell, they become digital dust and fade into the air. So what purpose is there for a person to be thrown here? Well, anyway, the incinerator gives Hakuno a flashback to a roaring city in flames, and I might as well cover this part now. When Hakuno sees the city on flames, we are led to believe it is his own memories, because of Twice's line that remarks the memories of humans to Earth. This leads me to question Hakuno's character and where exactly in terms of time we are. If this is truly Hakuno's history, by seeing these visions, then who exactly was the first Hakuno we saw in the opening cutscene? My personal theory is that the first Hakuno who we see, the female version, is Hakuno, the original. The male we see before us instead is the amalgamation of deleted data, who has gained consciousness over the 1,000 years, who, by chance, has taken the form or similarities of a male Hakuno. The memories of the burning city are strictly related to the original Hakuno. Therefore, there cannot be two people who observe the same event, unless her memories, the memories of the deleted individuals, have taken shape into his memories, the male Hakuno. Regardless, the incinerator serves as the burial ground for all deleted data. The concept of angry data does serve solid ground, as over the course of 1,000 years, individuals were killed over and over again, trying to see the difference in the repeated events only to be slaughtered. Characters like Rin Tosaka, Leonardo B. Harway, just to name a few characters with weight on their name, would continue in the tournament, but also face deletion, as they never win their respective week. All this data has been tortured for years, and now it has been funneled into one single person and seeks to support the entire nature of anger for Hakuno. But that is it. It is not expected for any other trait to rise out of this character than just to be angry and tortured. No other hidden ability might make this already bland character overpowered. Hopefully. Last Encore's inclusion of a brand new character, Amari, is a wild card. A character who serves the purpose of holding Shinji back from his blatant misogyny and abuse. The Shinji we see in Last Encore is completely different from the one we see in Fate Extra, and the reason for this escapes my mind. Perhaps Nasu wanted to draw back on Shinji's outright bullying behavior toward Hakuno as he usually does, being reminiscent of his own earlier works with Shinji and Shiro, which I don't think he wants to copy. Seeing as how the flashbacks that Hakuno witnesses in this episode look eerily similar to the Fuyuki fire. Of course, there is reason for those comparisons, and we will just gloss over them. Regardless, this Shinji does have some, and I put that lightly, some restraint. Shinji has been humbled by having a girlfriend with him. It is honestly jarring to see Shinji respecting women. Hakuno takes the role of the third wheel as he is invited to lunch, and Amari's line of "eat lunch with us as usual" is what confuses me in terms of the chronology. Are the events of Fate Extra being repeatedly continued, or is it just this specific day? However, we know from playing the game that this Day 1 in Last Encore is completely different from Day 1 in Fate Extra. When have the events shifted differently? Has Hakuno only repeated this day? Or is it just the amalgamation of data? Twice as already stated that they are repeating the same day. Considering that we can only make these assumptions and have some foundation of understanding what is even remotely going on, how in the world is someone who has only watched the anime meant to fully understand the scenes that are happening? Foundationally, this anime entirely relies on the game being played beforehand to understand the mystery of Last Encore. We switch our attention over to the auditorium, where we see another familiar face, Leonardo, playing a game of what seems to be fatal chess, where the loser is killed. This is another aspect of Last Encore that I liked, in which the only way to advance was by killing another individual. It shows how willing an individual is to kill someone else, whereas in Fate Extra, it was reliant on your worthiness of a servant, or of a master. It gives all future participants we see as being less than innocent, as even Amari must have killed someone. All the people who had died during the apocalyptic deletion, that we will soon talk about in a bit, were either victims of the deranged killers that roam through Tsukimihara Academy as it's being erased, or rather killed by the world itself, only to die over and over again. Take, for instance, when Hakuno himself is killed by Shinji. Hakuno lowered his guard when Shinji mentioned that they were best friends, believing in him only to be killed without restraint. Hakuno, who died with rage and anger in his heart, was only one of probably thousands that died in the same way, which would funnel into one single core of a new self-aware creation. After the speakers initiate the purging process in the second half of the episode, the same AI we have countlessly seen in Fate Extra are given life and hunt the victims of the Academy. The myriad of colors that are thrown at us while the chaos happens are unique. I understand that the swirl of different colors are meant to represent chaos, but does it have to go that far? It is more of a personal preference, really, but felt as having too much on the screen was distracting. Hakuno, on the floor, bleeding his guts out, loses his consciousness and allows for death to take his soul. Until it doesn't. Hakuno wakes up in a pool of his own blood and rises up to escape away from the hunters of the academy. Personally, I believe that there could also be another theory of what is happening in the chronology. Perhaps Hakuno is killed by Shinji repeatedly, and he dies, and will stay dead on the floor. But it just so happens, for Last Encore's purposes, he might break the cycle and wake up and not die and make his way to the incinerator. Or perhaps I'm just still not hitting the mark. It is here that we find the true purpose of the incinerator Limbus. It is a grave, not just for the bodies that have died in Tsukimihara Academy, but also the grave of a particular servant who we saw in the opening scene. From here, I will only briefly go over the scene of the summoning. Hakuno is being chased by a stone statue of the nameless servant to the point he falls into Limbus itself. The ground beneath him cracks and unveils a lone sword stuck in the ground, which is raised by Hakuno, which indicates the worthiness of the summoning of Saber to fight against the nameless statue. After a quick quarrel, the two become acquainted, take the Moon Mile ladder to the floor above, and continue on their journey into Last Encore. I don't really know why Nasu decided to pick Nero as the main servant to be used in this anime, as she is generally seen as the more boring of the two. Personally, I would have wanted Nameless to be the main servant of Hakuno in this anime to be paired with, but I guess that pair wouldn't be self-insert enough, especially considering that right after Saber is summoned, the next subsequent scene is Hakuno and Saber both naked in a shower scene. Nero is the easiest difficulty servant to use when you start playing Fate Extra for beginners. Perhaps Nasu wanted to make an easier entry into the game by using the first servant you would usually use when playing through the game the first time. Out of all the newest additions to Fate Extra, through Last Encore, I would say that the Moon Mile ladder is by far the most interesting we are shown. The only time you truly go down in Fate Extra was when you are going to commit the darkest action that you would have to take while in the tournament, which was to kill someone. The elevator scene, in which I like to put it, is one of my favorite parts of Fate Extra, because in it, the two opponents and their servants exchange witty lines as a build-up to the eventual conflict. Hopefully, while this is going on, I might actually put some brief exchanges between servants in the video. Then, once you have reached as low as you can go, you duke it out against your enemy for that week in an honorable manner. Whereas the Moon Mile ladder shows ascension, metaphorically telling the audience that Hakuno has reached beyond the lowest point, and must now fight his way back up. He is literally dead by entering the grave of Saber, and now rises back up to rejuvenate himself. Fate Extra only gave the participants and their servants an empty classroom so that they could personalize, as throughout Fate Extra, after every week, you were given the brief enjoyment of having your room changed, I think at least in 3 different phases, as your servant and you progressed and grew a closer bond together. But within this elevator, there is a plethora of activities, such as bathing, a living room, most likely beds. If Type Moon wanted to profit even more from this anime, they would have made a life simulator within this small scene. Yet still, this elevator still holds the same amount of tension Hakuno would have when confronting a new enemy. The elevator in both works moves only to the next confrontation. As we continue throughout the new moon cell that has rusted over 1,000 years, we do not know what new horrors we will encounter after time has impacted everyone on that floor. And one of the main reasons why I would still argue that Fate Extra should be played beforehand is because you know what is going to happen. You are smiling in anticipation, and I make this note later on, but you are smiling in anticipation of what is to come. We know which floor will house which master and servant, and it is because of that we can enjoy, to the fullest extent, how they have changed. There is no payoff of seeing, well, I'm getting too far of myself. The preliminary section of Last Encore is what I can say an interesting take. Nasu's intention are put on full display as we see the structural differences to the moon cell, and that is what is fully shown in the first episode and subsequent partial of the second, that the moon cell will be physically different. It sets the entire theme of the show, as the moon mile ladder will focus on rising up into the sky instead of only going horizontally. Saber is now metaphorically and quite literally a deity, as we are given the illusion of carrying on upwards past the sky to eventually confront him, which brings another question into mind. The floor beneath them is being deleted. As we saw previously, the moon cell is no longer a constant structure that will eventually go horizontally towards the Angelica cage, where Twice is waiting, but instead into an uphill battle. That means that the world beneath Hakuno and Saber will be deleted. But what does that mean? Does it mean that the familiar faces will finally have their final resting place after being trapped here for 1,000 years? Will Hakuno be the literal Grim Reaper of this anime as he kills whatever faces his way? And that even leads to another question. Even if Hakuno does make it past the few subsequent floors, and let's say his journey ends on the 5th floor, what does that mean? The creations that were trapped in 1,000 years in the lower subsequent floors that were deleted, will they remain deleted? Or will another cycle just ensue for another 1,000 years as well? There is very little to understand, but I guess that is part of the mystery of Last Encore itself. That is the assumption we get as Saber explains the new rules of this moon cell, in which every floor holds a floor boss, meaning our weekly bosses we have faced in Fate Extra will be making a familiar return. For someone who has already played the game, we are smiling in anticipation because the characters we are going to see are predictable, but that is not bad. Last Encore has purposefully made to us, or to use, that feeling of, oh, it's you again, but now we can see how different the character is from how they formerly were. But we turn to the other side of the coin, and for individuals who have never played Fate Extra, they will receive the bare minimum of what the enemy is. Each opponent is hyper-summarized into what they have turned into, not their actual characters that have grown between the time period. It would have been an interesting scenario to see these sad characters change, but Nasu wanted to go for the 10-episode sweet spot that only impacts us as the most superficial, glossed over watch. What brings me the most pain out of this first part is that Nasu had a genuinely good idea on what he wanted to create. There was a world that was ready to be explored, but its wings were subsequently cut short. If this first episode is a reflection of what the remainder of this anime is, then I am worried. I am worried in the lackluster main character who does nothing to invoke a connection out of us. I am annoyed by the servant Saber who is trying to push a connection with this character who is at most a walking skin and bones in terms of characterization. And my expectations are lowered in how much time we will spend on every episode and floor, as it is clear we will not have enough time to fully create a story that we can attach ourselves to. Conceptually, this anime could and may be a masterpiece. It has the gears to make it so. But the truth is, from here at least, that its execution might be falling flat. Limbus, the dead data NPC, and Saber are factors to consider that are attempting to carry this show. But the problem is that it cannot carry a show when the protagonist is dead weight and, frankly, boring. For now, we will have to see how our main story progresses, and if it will prove me wrong, in which the anime will make enough time to show every floor and give every character its proper respect. And on that note, the Moon Mile Ladder has finally reached the first floor of the Moon Cell Prison, where we will discuss the characters Shinji Mato and Servant Rider, and whether time has been kind to them or not.